I remember the credit before I remember the pain. Not the argument later. The sound of my stepfather slamming his full weight against my front door shook my entire rental, my back slamming into what I thought was a solid glass door. By the time I reached for my phone, for half a second had already begun to bend. And when I finally looked through the peephole, I heard it shatter, I never expected to see on a cold Wisconsin night. My own mother standing beside him, whispering, my body tilted backward. Just unlock it, sweetheart. Pain tore through me. We're family. And blinding. If only they knew how much that word no longer meant. I remember thinking, before I tell you what happened next, I want to pause for a moment. Wherever you're watching from, dark. I hope this Christmas brings you clean memory I have of that day. And warmth with the people who truly love you. There's only silence. Hold them broken by flashes of sound. Be grateful for them. Fear I didn't yet understand. As you're about to see. But if I go back a few days earlier, the people who share your blood can become the people you fear the most. Now let me take you back to the night everything in my life cracked open. I had just finished a grueling 10-hour shift at Summit Line Technologies in Cedar Falls, and I grew up in a house that looked safe. Another day of troubleshooting computers for strangers who seemed convinced their laptops were described as quiet. The November air was sharp when I stepped into the parking lot. Homes with white fences. I remember thinking only about reheating leftover Thai food was and curling up under my electric blanket, warm and inviting. But the moment my phone reconnected to mobile data into that 17 missed messages lit up the screen. Every single one my mom loved, my stepfather, family photos lined the hallway. Birthdays, call me holidays, matching smiles, need you to co-sign refinance papers, urgent. From the outside, bank needs your approval like a normal American family. Don't be selfish. We need you. I learned very young. The last one from Ronald simply read, my sister Rowan was 3 years older than me. Instinctive dread slid through me. She was tall, athletic. They had never asked me to co-sign any attention toward her without the house, not for the business, in high school, not for emergencies. She was the star of the volleyball team. Never. Teachers praised her. I sat in the driver's seat and opened my credit app. My parents spoke her name with pride. A hard inquiry Rowan from Heritage Community Credit Union. I was careful. Dated the day before. I learned to read her moods the way other kids learned math. The sound of her steadied in a strange, the way doors closed a little too hard, the way it does when your body realizes the danger has already begun. I learned when to speak. I opened all three bureaus. More importantly, when not to. One by one, I froze everything. If Rowan was calm, the house breathed. If she wasn't, we all held our breath. 3 confirmations. My parents never called it fear. I didn't know it yet, understanding. But that single act, they said Rowan was under pressure. Never uncross. They said she felt things deeply. I made the drive home. They said I needed to be more patient, running more 2 yellow lights, more convinced were red. Sometimes my mother would say it without even lowering bag onto the couch when the pounding began. Sensitive, not knocking, don't push her. Tapping, pounding, don't push her. The kind of pounding as if my existence alone wasn't already doing that. Open the door, Leah. The first time Rowan shoved Ronald's voice. I was 11, thick with rage. She didn't mean to hurt me. I know you're in there. My parents said. I approached the second time with the same caution someone approaches a rattlesnake. The third time, she was exhausted. Ronald stood inches away. Over the years, face red, excuses piled up neatly. Carol hovered like behind him and pushed against a door to keep something ugly from being seen. Arms wrapped around herself, as if to appear fragile. Shoves became bruises and opened the door 2 inches. Bruises became long sleeves and practiced smiles. I asked, and every time, you know damn well, the explanation was the same. Ronald snapped. She's under a lot of pressure. The bank can't move forward with the refinance. Or maybe I needed to. So you did try to use my information. That if I stayed quiet enough, small enough, stepped in, everything would stay manageable. Sweetheart, that if I just a better rate, the roof shines too brightly. Just co-sign for us. Too much space. It's family. I could keep the peace. You didn't ask. I replied. That belief shaped everything about me. You just went ahead and did it. I stopped asking for things. Both hands against the door frame. Celebrating myself. The chain strained so hard, I thought it would snap. You ungrateful little, after everything we've done for you. She didn't need to. Everything the way my parents rushed to soothe her after she hurt me. You nearly broke my ribs when I was 16. The way my pain was always an inconvenience. Carol didn't even take me to the hospital. Something to be minimized, brushed aside. Carol's face explained away. Just a flicker. By the time I was 17, the house didn't feel like a home. Don't bring up the past. It felt like a waiting room. This is about helping us. Like something terrible by committing identity theft, and we were all pretending not to see the clock. Ronald leaned in until I could smell the beer on his breath. I knew it was coming. Right now, I just didn't know it would arrive in the form of shattered glass. I slammed the door shut, and darkness swallowing my name. The next impact was so violent, before I continued, the wood around the deadbolt splintered. Where are you listening from right now? Adrenaline flooded my limbs. What city? What country? This was the moment I had rehearsed in my head for years. In a quiet American suburb. I grabbed my pre-packed duffel, my folder of important documents, travels my laptop, breaks the silence. My keys. The shift didn't happen as Ronald roared and kicked at the door. It crept in quietly. I slipped out the back entrance, the way mold does behind walls. Breath until the air in the night air felt heavy and wrong. I dialed 911 while running to my car. At first, it was Leah Monroe. I said. A sprained ankle she pretended didn't hurt. Trying to break down my door. Practices she He's attempting to force me to unlock my credit for a fraudulent loan. Then the losses stacked up. The dispatcher asked if I was safe. Coaches no longer calling her name first. I whispered. A new girl on the team who jumped higher and moved faster. But I'm leaving now. Rowan never talked about it. And that was the night I learned the most terrifying truth of the house at night. Sometimes the danger isn't a stranger in the dark. Sometimes she had built her entire identity on winning, pounding on your door, demanding access to your life, and suddenly your identity wasn't your future. Around the same time, sometimes something unexpected happened because you finally choose yourself. I got the email late one afternoon. I didn't stop shaking until I saw the iron gates of Evan's neighborhood rise in front of me. Sketchbooks. The guard recognized my brother's name and waved me through without question. Instead, I must have looked red. Eyes read the first lines 3 times before it made sense. Ronald's fist slamming against my door, competitive digital arts program in Portland. Evan opened the front door before I even knocked. Not violently, just enough to notice. Jesus, what happened? A strange feeling. I collapsed into his arms. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Almost dangerous. When I finally pulled away, I wasn't sure where to place it inside my body. Still in her paralegal scrubs. That night at dinner, I told my parents. A steaming mug of chamomile tea. My mom already in her hands, looking up like she'd known I was coming. My dad said, "Come in. That's nice," she said softly. In the same tone he used whatever when the weather forecast was average. I told myself the warmth of their home hit me so hard it felt like another shock. Then Rowan walked in, soft lighting. Mom glanced at her, the faint smell of cinnamon. Everything my own got into that arts program in Portland. Everything my childhood wasn't. Carefully, like we settled at their kitchen island ground. I told them everything. Froze. Her eyes moved to me slowly, deliberately. The credit freeze. The one near the athletic center. To understand. She asked. Evan's jaw tightened. I said. He tried to break your door down. Quiet. For money. Instinctively. For my identity. Jaw tightened. I corrected. So Lauren now you're invading my space too. Okay. I tried to explain. First step. That the buildings were different. Every detail. That it wasn't even near her facilities. She brought out her laptop, nothing to do with her. And suddenly we were in crisis logic didn't mode. Exist in that moment. I logged into my credit report. All Rowan heard. The moment that the page loaded, had something Evan she didn't. Swore under his breath. The slap came out of nowhere. There it was. A refinance I was standing there from 3 months ago. My head already snapped sideways, listing Ronald Briggs as primary borrower. The room went silent. And me as co-signer. I tasted metal. Income, no one moved. $92,000. Mom sighed first. Actual income? Rowan's under a lot of pressure. $61,500, rubbing her temples. Primary contact number. Mila, you shouldn't provoke her. My stomach dropped. Provoke her. They inflated my income by 50%, realizing something inside me had shifted rapidly. Not broken. They forged your employment records too, like a fault line finally giving way. The bank wouldn't process this otherwise. Rowan's anger sharpened. Why would they try this months ago? It was no longer unpredictable. Evan asked. It was focused. I knew the answer to everything. He said it, the way I walked. Because the music I listened to. They didn't need me to know. The time I spent drawing. They just needed my signature. Near my door at night, and they almost just long enough for me to know she was there. Document I'd forgotten existed. Sometimes she'd shove me as she passed. My chest tightened at the thought. Not hard enough to leave marks. Lauren leaned over my screen. Hard enough to remind me. Let's pull everything. I learned to keep my eyes down, line by line. I learned to disappear again. So we did. We found a hard inquiry from Heritage Community Credit Union 2 days earlier. He lived next door. I had already frozen in time. We'd grown up together. Next came old entries I'd never noticed. Quiet conversations on unresolved steps. Then something new emerged. Others didn't. Lauren squinted. The way I flinched when Rowan's voice rose. Filing. The way I wore long sleeves, even when it was warm. The words blurred for a second. One afternoon, he stopped me as I was heading home. Leah That's Monroe. Not an accident. Personal guarantor for Briggs Home Renovations, LLC. I followed his gaze. Loan. Filed 6 weeks ago. Yellowing at the edges. I felt my breath lodge in my throat. I hadn't even remembered how it got there. I never signed anything. I didn't answer. Anything. You need to start documenting this, Evan said quietly. Pictures. Or someone pretending to be you. Everything. Lauren didn't say anything at first. It won't matter. She just looked at the filing again and again, as if waiting for it to change, he said. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. Those words stayed with me. This isn't spur of the moment. That night, I opened a blank notebook and wrote collecting your financial information, building a paper trail, hesitated before making it look like you're already tied to their debts. Then I wrote what happened. My pulse just pounded in my ears. No emotions. Why would they do that? When I could. To justify the refinance patterns, Lauren said. After a week, I realized you're already financially entangled with them. This wasn't random. That you're a willing participant. Spiraling. The room tilted slightly. I started hiding the journal hand on my shoulder, slipping it into his desk drawer like contraband. I said, like proof of something no one wanted to name. Lauren nodded. What are you preparing for? A financial crimes detective. She helped one of our clients last year. Then the truth came out. Within minutes, she had Detective Natalie Brooks on speakerphone. The day she goes too far. Natalie's voice was surprisingly calm after that. The storm I felt tearing through me, like it was waiting. Leah, and I want you to breathe. I knew I wasn't documenting gives us leverage. But I need everything to survive. Screenshots. That afternoon didn't feel dangerous at first. And we're going to build a timeline. That's what still unsettles me. Color-coded. You'll understand why later can wear the disguise of normal. I did everything she said. Sunlight spilled through my bedroom window. For the next 2 hours, I gathered evidence. Soft. My hands still shaking, but steadier. My dress for the showcase hung from the closet door. By midnight, I had a folder labeled fraud, but it felt like armor, filled with screenshots of forged income, denied applications. It was the first time my work would be displayed publicly. Ronald's threats, the first time something Carol's I made would exist outside the walls of our house. When I finally looked up from the glowing screen to get a glass of water, Evan and Lauren were still beside me. I was gone less than a minute. No hesitation. When I came back, just unwavering presence. Paper covered the floor like snow. They're not getting anywhere near you again. But Lauren added something I hadn't considered. Weeks of work. were ripped
People
clean
don't forge
down the middle.
signatures, falsify
My
income,
tablet lay
and
cracked
file
on the
fake
desk.
loan documents overnight.
And Rowan was standing
This
there,
took planning,
breathing hard.
time,
My artwork
access
clenched
to
in
your
her
life.
fists. The truth hit me
What
like
are you
ice
doing?
water.
This
My
wasn't
voice
an
came
act of
out thin,
desperation.
barely mine.
This wasn't a misunderstanding.
She didn't look ashamed.
This wasn't even
She
about
looked
saving their
satisfied.
house. They'd
You
been building
really
this
thought
fraud
you were
for
going
months,
to have your
maybe
little moment
years.
tonight?
And I was
She
just
said.
beginning to uncover
Your little
how
art
deep
show?
the betrayal went.
I took
I
a
barely
step
slept
forward
the
without
night before
thinking.
we went to the bank.
Stop. That's
Every
my
time
work.
I closed my eyes,
Her eyes
I saw
snapped to
forged
mine,
signatures,
wild and bright.
inflated income numbers.
I'm not letting you walk
my
in
mother's
there
face
acting like you
whispering,
matter.
Just unlock
I called
it.
for my parents.
We're family.
My voice shook.
By sunrise,
but I didn't scream.
I felt like I was walking on
I still
nerves
believed
instead of
some
legs.
stupid part of me.
Detective
that
Natalie
if they saw
Brooks
this,
picked me up
really
at
saw
Evan's
it,
house. They would finally
she
step
drove
in.
with the calm certainty
They came
of someone
upstairs
who'd
annoyed,
watched hundreds of
not
criminals
alarmed.
fall apart under pressure.
Rowan gestured to the wreckage.
Today is
She
about
started
clarity,
she said.
I couldn't speak.
And about giving
The
them
words
the chance
wouldn't
to
line up.
incriminate themselves.
Mom sighed.
Don't speak
Neela,
unless I tell you
know
to.
your sister
You're
is
the
under a
victim,
lot of pressure.
not the negotiator.
Pressure. Her reassurance
Again,
helped.
always.
Barely. When we
That was
arrived
the
at
moment
Heritage
something
Community
inside me
Credit
went
Union,
cold.
the lobby
Not
smelled
numb,
faintly of
clear.
coffee and printer toner.
I knew then
that
Olivia
nothing I
Hayes,
said
the
would
branch
change the
manager,
story they
greeted
needed
us
to
with a
believe.
firm handshake. Professional,
Later that
but
afternoon,
sympathetic. The mail arrived.
She looked like someone
I was
who
in
had
my
seen
room,
her share of
sitting on the
financial
edge of my
disasters,
bed,
but
staring
still
at what was
believed in
left of my
fairness.
work.
When I heard
Leon's
Rowan,
door
she
slam,
said, guiding
the
us
sound
into her
vibrated
office,
through the hallway.
I'm glad you came.
I recognized
You need to
the
see
rhythm
this with
of her
your own
footsteps
eyes.
immediately.
She
Fast,
slid a thick
sharp,
folder across
hunting.
the desk.
I gathered my
43
things,
pages.
instinct kicking in.
I took a breath and opened
I
it.
planned to retreat
The first
downstairs
page stopped
to
my
wait it
heart.
out. A Wisconsin
I was
state
almost
ID
to the
with
hallway
my name,
when she appeared.
my birth date,
My
Neela.
address. But the
My
photo
name
wasn't
sounded
me.
like an accusation.
It was some woman
She
with
was
my
holding
hair
a
color,
letter,
my skin
crushed in
tone,
her hand.
my age bracket.
Her face was flushed,
close enough to
eyes
pass
glassy
a
with
glance.
rage, not close enough to be me.
You think this is funny?
Page after page
she demanded.
revealed the rest of the deception.
I don't know what you mean.
Fake pay stubs,
I said.
fake employment
Of course
letters
you don't.
with forged
She snapped.
signatures.
You never
from
do.
a non-existent
You just
HR
float
manager,
around ruining everything.
a falsified
I stepped
W-2
back.
listing income
stepped
I
forward.
had never earned.
Rowan, not
Even
today.
a fabricated
I said.
email thread
Please,
between me
I
and
have
the
to
bank.
leave soon.
Proof I had
Oh,
supposedly
I know,
agreed to the
she said.
refinance. Your big night.
But what broke me
Everyone
open
looking
inside
at you
was
praising
page
you.
23.
She grabbed my
My
shoulder
old rental
and yanked
agreement
me toward her.
The lease from
Pain
my
shot
apartment
through
3
my
years
arm.
ago.
My
Let
real
go,
signature,
I said
scanned
quietly.
perfectly.
She
Uploaded
shoved
from
me
an
instead.
IP address
I
registered to
stumbled
Briggs
back,
Home
hitting the
Renovations
wall.
LLC.
A framed family photo
God.
rattled beside my
I
head.
whispered.
Last
They kept
Christmas.
that? All of us smiling
For
like
years.
nothing was wrong. Olivia nodded
You
gently.
always take from me.
This wasn't
she
spontaneous,
said, her
Leah.
voice shaking.
Someone has been
Every time
collecting
I
and
fail,
storing your personal
all anyone
documents for
sees
quite
is
some
you
time.
succeeding.
The room
That's
seemed
not
to
true,
tilt for a
I
moment.
said.
Then
face
Olivia
twisted.
revealed the final
You
blow.
make me look weak.
The refinancing amount was
I
set
tried
at
to move past her.
$400,000. She grabbed my
The
wrist,
house is only
twisting
valued
hard
at about
I cried out,
$220,000,
and the sound seemed to
the
fuel
extra
her.
$180,000
Stop acting
would be
like a
deposited
victim.
directly
She
into
hissed.
a business account
I'm not,
owned jointly
I
by
said.
Ronald and
You
Carol.
are.
You would be legally
Her face was
responsible for the
inches
entire
from my
loan.
now. And then she said the
My
words that
stomach
stripped
hollowed
everything
out.
bare. So I would have been in debt
You should
for
have
the rest
never
of my
been
life.
born.
That
The
was
world
plan.
narrowed to a single
Natalie
point.
said quietly. I stepped back
Everything
without
after
thinking.
that happened fast.
Behind me was the glass
The bank
office
had followed
door.
Natalie's advice
Frosted
and
patterned.
told Carol there had
Something
been a
we'd
minor
always been told
processing
was
glitch,
reinforced, and she needed to return
Safe.
the next morning
Rowan
to sign
lunged.
updated papers.
Her hands slammed into me.
Carol agreed
hard,
instantly.
deliberate.
Ronald would
My
wait
back
in the
hit
truck
glass,
outside,
and
I
for a
wasn't
fraction
allowed in
of
the
a
lobby
second,
when it went
held.
down.
Then
Natalie
it didn't.
positioned me in an
The
adjacent
sound
office,
was sharp and
the
endless.
blinds cracked just
Glass
just
exploded
enough
behind
so I
me.
could see without
I felt
being
myself
seen.
falling.
Weightless.
My pulse thudded
the air
in my
tearing
ears.
from my lungs.
At 9:06
Shards
a.m.,
cut across my skin.
Carol walked in
hot
wearing
and
her
cold
best winter
at once.
coat.
The same one I
hit
bought
the
her on
hardwood
Black
floor
Friday
with
2
a
years
force
ago.
that knocked the world
She looked
sideways.
composed, almost cheerful.
I heard someone scream.
Like a woman running
Maybe
errands.
it was her.
Maybe
She
it
sat
was
across
me.
from Marcus
Pain
Reed,
flared,
the loan consultant,
blinding, and began her performance.
Then my vision dimmed.
I have Leah's
Edges closing
authorization,
in.
she said.
The last thing I remember
She unlocked
is
her
Rowan's
credit
voice.
last night.
Hi.
Marcus
Panicked.
didn't flinch.
Not with concern.
Excellent.
But with fear.
Do you have the letter
And
she
then
mentioned?
everything went dark.
Carol handed
People
him
think
an
a
envelope
coma is
with a
empty.
flourish.
Quiet.
Inside, a one-page
Like a switch flipped off.
authorization letter with
It
my
isn't.
name and a signature
Darkness
that
has
almost
weight
looked like
and
mine.
ears.
Except the
I
L
couldn't
looped
open
the
my
wrong
eyes.
way. I couldn't
Marcus
move,
read it slowly,
but I heard everything.
So Leah
Every
agrees
word
to be
people
fully
said
responsible
when they
for the
believed believed I was
balance,
already
correct?
gone.
Oh,
Their
yes.
voices drifted
Carol
through
said
the dark
quickly.
like sounds
Too
underwater.
quickly.
Warped,
She
but
trusts us.
unmistakable. Rowan's
And she
came
understands
first.
the cash-out funds
It was
go
an
directly
accident,
to your accounts?
she kept saying, over
Of
and
course
over.
she does.
Her
We're
voice was
family.
sharp, frantic.
That was the crack.
She startled me.
The tiny
She made
fracture
me
in her
angry.
story
She
that
always
told the
does.
world she wasn't just
There it
lying.
was.
She
Even
was
here.
rehearsing.
Even now.
Marcus leaned back.
My mother was crying.
One more question.
Not the restrained
When did
sighs
Leah
I'd grown
tell
up
you
with,
she unlocked her
but
credit?
raw, shaking sobs.
Carol froze.
The kind I had never heard
last
from her
night.
before.
At around
She's our daughter, she fumbled,
She kept
choosing
repeating.
a time.
She's our
8:30.
daughter. I didn't know
Marcus
which
nodded
one she meant.
slowly.
Interesting.
A doctor spoke
because
next,
her credit
calm
is
and
still
clinical.
frozen.
Severe
Silence.
traumatic brain injury.
Sharp,
Significant blood
electric.
loss.
swelling around
Natalie
the brain.
and two officers
One
stepped
artery
inside.
came dangerously close to being severed.
Carol Monroe,
if emergency
Natalie said,
pressure hadn't been
voice
applied
steady and
immediately,
authoritative,
she wouldn't have survived
You
transport.
are under arrest for identity
Transport.
theft,
Financial
that
fraud,
was when I heard
and
Ethan's
submitting
voice.
forged documents
Low,
to a federally
steady,
insured
familiar.
institution. My dad got there first.
Carol's face
said.
drained of all
He
color.
applied pressure.
No.
He called it in.
No, this is
Ethan's
a
misunderstanding.
Father, a paramedic.
Leah said,
The only adult who
I
had ever
stepped into
treated
the
my
doorway
injuries
then.
like emergencies
Not close,
instead of
not
inconveniences.
triumphant. Just
Time
present.
didn't move normally in that
She
place.
saw me.
And
Moments
every
looped.
lie she'd ever
Voices
told
returned
collapsed
and faded.
behind her eyes.
Sometimes I
Outside,
heard nurses whispering
through the
about
lobby
my
windows,
case.
Ronald was
Sibling
dragged out
assault.
of his pickup truck
One of them
by two
said
more
softly,
officers.
It's worse
shouting
when
my
it's family.
name like a curse. Sometimes
As
I
the
heard
handcuffs
Rowan
tightened
crying,
around her wrists,
not from guilt,
Carol
but
reached
fear.
out.
Not to me,
Fear of
but to the
consequences.
fantasy of the
Fear
control
of
she'd
losing
always
control
wielded.
of the story.
Leah, tell
Then,
them.
one
Tell them you
sentence cut
agreed.
through everything.
I shook
Sharp
my
as
head.
the glass that broke
I
me.
told the truth.
There's
I
a
said
pattern.
quietly, a man's voice
For the
said,
first time in my
this
life,
didn't start that day.
I finally told the truth.
That was when
And
the
just
truth
like
surfaced.
that,
Their entire
Ethan
scheme
brought
began
everything.
to crumble. My journal,
Not with a
the
scream,
photos, but with
dates,
the cold, undeniable
descriptions,
click of
patterns
steel
of
closing
escalation
around their
written in my
wrists.
own handwriting.
The morning after the arrest,
Teachers were
Detective
contacted.
Natalie called
Neighbors
me
were
before
interviewed.
interviews. Old
Her voice
teammates
carried
of
an
Rowan
energy
spoke
I had
up.
never heard from her
People
before.
who had seen things,
Leah,
suspected
she said,
things, but
we
never
executed
connected
the
them.
search warrant.
You
until
need to
now.
hear what we found.
The silence
2
my
hours
parents had
later,
protected for
I was
years
standing in the
collapsed
middle of
under
my
the
mother
weight of
and
evidence.
Ronald's living room.
I
The
heard
same
my father
house where I
speak
once
once,
curled into
his
corners
voice
to
hollow.
survive their shouting.
We should have stopped
now
this.
torn apart by
Rowan
investigators
snapped
in
back
latex
instantly.
gloves and blue
You
booties.
told me she was the
But the real
problem.
horror
You
wasn't
always
inside
said
the
she made
house.
everything harder
It
for
was
me.
underneath it. The
Or
silence
rather,
that followed
miles
was
away
thick.
from it.
In a
Final.
storage facility,
Weeks
rented
passed,
under a
or
fake
days.
name. I'm not
Natalie
sure.
led me through a
Darkness
narrow
doesn't
hallway
come
that
with
smelled of
calendars.
metal and dust.
Then one morning,
When she opened
the
the
dark
rolling
thinned.
door of Unit 314,
It wasn't sudden.
a cold
It was
breath
like a fog
escaped,
lifting inch
like
by
the
inch.
room exhaled
A
decades
pulse,
of secrets.
a flicker,
box after box.
Pain rushed
stacked
in
three
first,
high,
deep,
labeled with
relentless,
dates, initials, and
strange
strange
sounds.
symbols.
Beeping monitors.
For a moment, I thought they
the
might
hum
be
of
old
machines,
tax records,
cold
junk,
air,
forgotten keepsakes.
I opened my eyes,
But then Natalie
the room
opened
was
the
too
first
bright.
box.
My body
Inside
wouldn't
were
move.
plastic folders
Panic
filled
surged
with scanned
until a
IDs,
hand squeezed
social
mine.
security cards,
Ethan,
tax returns.
He was slumped in a chair
handwritten
beside the bed,
signatures traced
his
again
head
and
resting
again
on
near my
thin
arm.
practice paper. When he realized
Pages
I was
of forged
awake,
W-2s.
he didn't speak at first.
Employer letters from
He just
companies
exhaled.
that no longer existed.
The sound breaking
Bank
halfway
statements
through.
doctored so
You're
precisely
here,
that
he said
even
finally.
I wouldn't have spotted the edits at a
Doctors
glance.
explained everything in
And
pieces.
one folder, set apart
3
from the
weeks
rest,
in a coma,
had my name on it.
multiple surgeries.
It was thick,
a long recovery
I stared
ahead.
at it like it was
They
radioactive.
told me my memory might come back
How
unevenly.
long?
I whispered
that my body would resist simple
Natalie flipped
movements
through
for
it,
months, her jaw tightening.
Then they told me the rest.
The earliest document
Rowan had
is
been
from when you were
arrested,
19,
charged with aggravated assault,
my knees
resulting in
buckled.
severe bodily injury.
Evan caught my arm before I
because
hit
of
the
the concrete
evidence.
floor, because of the pattern.
19,
because
before
what
I
happened
even left
wasn't
for
an
college.
accident. Before I
It was
even knew what a
escalation.
credit report was. She was released pending trial.
This wasn't
under
desperate,
strict conditions.
Natalie added.
A restraining
was
order
curated,
was issued immediately.
cultivated.
A
She was
long-term
barred
resource,
from contacting
a
me in
resource.
any way.
That's what I
For
had
the
been to
first
them.
time in my
Not
life,
a daughter.
the system
not a
had drawn a
stepdaughter.
line my parents
a
never
resource.
did.
The
My
boxes
parents came
revealed
into the
even
room
more
later.
victims.
They
17
looked smaller
people in
somehow,
total.
older.
3 relatives
They
on Carol's
apologized.
side,
Or tried to.
former employees who
spilled
had
out.
trusted Ronald
Fear,
with onboarding
regret,
paperwork,
explanations
elderly
that arrived
neighbors
years
who gave
too
him
late.
copies of financial
I
documents,
listened for
but something
safekeeping.
in me had shifted.
All of them
When
exploited.
the social worker
their
came,
identities
she
quietly
asked a
drained
simple
piece by
question.
piece.
Where would you like to
I
recover?
felt something inside me crack.
It
Not like a
stunned the
bone,
room into
but like a
silence.
belief.
No one
belief
had ever
that
asked me
somewhere
that
in the
before.
rubble of my childhood,
I didn't hesitate.
My mother must have loved me.
I don't want to
even
go
a little,
home,
I said.
but the evidence
My
told
voice
a
was
cleaner,
weak,
colder
but it
truth.
didn't shake.
She didn't
I
love
want
me.
to stay with my
She
aunt.
used me.
The words
Federal
landed
agents
like
arrived
truth.
as soon as they
For the
realized
first
the
time,
scale of the
the choice was
operation.
mine.
Santa Fe
Fraud
didn't
crossed
feel
state
real
lines.
at first. The air was
Forged
thinner,
documents
drier.
transmitted
The
electronically.
sky stretched wider than I was
Mail-based loan
used to.
applications.
A pale blue
This
that
qualifies
didn't press
under
down on my
RICO,
chest the
one
way
of them
ceilings
said.
used to. This is
My aunt's
organized
house
financial
sat at the edge
crime.
of town.
Modest
Hearing
and
that
quiet,
acronym,
surrounded by
RICO,
desert plants,
was like
that
stepping
looked
into
fragile,
a different universe.
but survived everything.
Those were charges
It
reserved
felt like
for
a different
gangs,
planet from the
syndicates,
place I'd come from.
people who operated
For
in
the
shadows.
first few nights,
And
I
now,
barely
for my
slept.
mother and Ronald,
Not because
the
of
betrayal
nightmares,
tasted
though
metallic
those
in my
came
mouth,
later,
but it wasn't
but
over.
because because my body didn't know what
while
safety
Carol was
felt
still
like.
awaiting arraignment,
She
silence
tried
used
calling
to
the
mean
bank
danger.
from jail. Here,
Using another
silence
inmate
just
to
meant
impersonate me.
quiet.
The call had been recorded.
Recovery was slow.
Hi, this is
painful,
Leah Monroe.
honest. The woman
My
said
scars
awkwardly.
healed faster than my nerves.
I
I changed my
mornings,
mind.
My hands shook
You
for
can
no
release
reason.
the funds to my
Sudden
parents.
sounds still made my heart race.
Even the attempt sounded
and there
pathetic,
were days when
but
the weight
fact
of what
she
I'd
made
lost,
it,
after being
years,
arrested,
a
after
childhood,
being exposed,
a version of myself,
told me the depth of her
sat
delusion.
so heavily on my chest.
Natalie played the
that
audio
breathing
for me
felt
while
like
I
work.
sat across from her
But
in her
no
office.
one here told me to be quiet.
I listened to the fake voice.
No one asked me to
the
make
trembling
things easier for
desperation.
someone else.
For the
She
first
really
time,
thought she
I
could
could
still
take
win.
up space without
I murmured.
apologizing. She thought she
I
still
started
owned you.
therapy.
Natalie corrected
Real therapy.
gently. The kind where
The
silence
trial
isn't
moved
demanded,
forward at
but
federal
invited.
speed, where
Ronald
someone
faced
listens
the
without
harshest
trying to
charges,
reshape your story
identity
into
theft,
something more
wire
comfortable.
fraud, mail fraud, money laundering,
That's where the idea of art
conspiracy
therapy came back to me.
Carol's charges
Not
were
as a
nearly
dream,
as severe,
but as a direction.
But she had something Ronald didn't.
I remembered the kids
Fear.
I'd seen in hospital
Her attorney
corridors.
negotiated a
Quiet
cooperation
eyes,
agreement,
guarded shoulders,
in exchange for a reduced
children who
sentence.
carried things they
She
couldn't
exposed
name.
everything.
I didn't
Every
want
victim,
to just survive
every
what
forged
happened to me.
document, every storage
I
unit.
wanted to turn it into
She
something
sold
that
Ronald
mattered.
out, and she
So I
sold out
enrolled.
the years she spent
Classes
pretending
weren't
she was
easy.
the powerless
Concentration
one.
came in waves.
When I testified, some
I
days
felt
my hands
strangely
remembered how to
hollow.
create, not triumphant.
Other days they
not
froze
vengeful,
over blank pages.
just done.
But every time I felt
Was your
myself
mother
shrinking,
coerced?
I reminded
The prosecutor
myself
asked.
of one simple truth.
No,
I was
said
allowed
steady.
to be here. She
I
learned
wasn't
how to
a victim
speak without asking
She was a
permission.
participant.
How to say
She
no
used motherhood
without
as
explaining.
emotional
How
leverage
to recognize
exploit
the
me.
difference between love and control.
The courtroom
Slowly,
was silent except
painfully,
for typing keys.
I became someone who
Ronald
didn't flinch
received
at her
12
own voice.
years in federal prison with
Justice
no early
didn't erase
release.
the past.
Carol
It didn't
received
give me
5
back
years
the girl I
and
was before
ordered
the
to
glass.
pay $1.4
before the
million
fear.
in
But
restitution.
it drew a line.
Money she
It
would
said
never
what
have.
happened to me
But
was
as
real,
the judge read their sentences,
that it mattered.
I didn't look at
that
Ronald.
silence was no
I
longer
looked at Carol.
required. Her
I
eyes
didn't go
searched
back
mine,
to that house,
as if waiting for
I
me
didn't
to break,
need closure
to
wrapped in
soften,
apologies that arrived
to save
too
her
late.
one last time.
What I needed was distance.
I didn't.
Choice.
Some bonds aren't
air.
broken.
Some
people
bonds were
think
never
surviving
real in
is
the
the
same
same
as
as
healing.
When
It
the
isn't.
sentencing was finally
Surviving
over,
is
and the
instinct.
courtroom emptied,
Healing is
I
a
walked
decision you
outside
make
into
over
the
and
cold
over,
Wisconsin
especially
air,
on days
feeling
when it
lighter.
hurts. Not
I don't live
victorious,
my life
not
trying to
relieved,
prove anything anymore.
just finally
not to my
able to
parents,
breathe without
not to the
someone
past.
else's hand on my life.
I live it for the girl
But
who
freedom
once
comes
believed
with
its
its
own
own kind
quiet
of rebuilding.
was the price of belonging.
The first thing I did
She
was
was wrong.
reconstruct
Silence
my
is
entire
not
financial
sacrifice.
identity from the ground
Endurance
up.
is not love.
I kept
And
every
family
family bureau
without
locked
responsibility
permanently,
is just blood,
replaced
not
old
safety.
security questions.
I
with
survived
ones
no
being pushed through a
algorithm
glass
or
door.
parent,
But
could
more
guess.
than that,
And
I
enrolled
survived
in
the
an identity
years that came
monitoring
before it.
service,
So
the
aggressive
ones that taught me
it would
I didn't
alert me
matter.
if a hacker so
And
much
that,
as
in
whispered
some
my
ways,
social
was the
security
harder
number
fall.
on a dark web forum.
If you've listened
Every
to this
major
story from the
transaction
beginning
in my
to the
life
end,
now
I want
required
to say this:
two-step verification.
I wish you a
in-person
peaceful,
confirmation
warm,
and gentle
original
Christmas.
documents only.
Wherever you are,
For the first
whoever
time,
you're with,
I wasn't reacting.
or even if you're alone,
I was defending.
May this season
I
bring
moved
you
out
a
of
little
the
more
converted
light
garage
than last
I
year
used to
did.
call home,
And
and
into
if
my
my
small
story
but
stayed with
sunlit
you,
one-bedroom
if it made you
apartment
feel
overlooking
seen
the Cedar
or
River.
understood,
It wasn't
or a
fancy,
little less
but
alone.
it felt like mine.
Please like this
Clean
video and
walls
subscribe.
without memories.
There are many
Windows
other
without
girls out
bars
there
of dread
with
across
stories
them.
just as real.
Summit
just
Line
as
allowed
heavy,
me to keep working
waiting to
remotely
be
with
heard.
enhanced security protocols.
Thank you for listening.
Some days
And
the
thank
quiet
you for
felt
staying.
unfamiliar.